Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dojo Live this Thursday, September 1st, 2022. It is the final show of the week and the first show of the month. How about that? My name is Kim Lantes, and it's my pleasure to be hosting today. Joining me as co-host is Colleen Dibble. Hi, Colleen. Hi. Oh, and Matt, he surprised us. He just popped in. Look at that.
Hi.
What do you call it? Late with style or something like that, Matt?
I was running back from the A's. So.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us, Matt, to co-host today. And of course, the star of today's show is Ryan Meyers, Head of Product and Data Science, right, at Manifest Climate. Thank you for joining us, Ryan.
Yeah, my pleasure. Excited to be here.
Yeah, all the way in Toronto. So, I'm kidding.
That is a thing. Yeah.
Interesting. I really enjoyed the moose from Brother Bear. They got me giggling. Yes. So today we're going to be talking about data-driven approaches to climate management. Before we get into that topic, however, we would really like to get to know you a bit better. Ryan, if you could tell us a bit about your passion, your story, and how that led up to Manifest Climate. Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just start with like a quick background of like the first half of my life. I kind of moved around quite a bit, actually, as I just alluded to in our pre-show conversation. I was born in Canada. I lived in Barbados for 5 years. I lived in the States, near New York, for 4 years. And twice actually in the UK. When I was a young kid, I used to have a very British accent, which is a little mind-blowing to watch old family videos. And then I graduated high school in the UK as well, and then came back to Canada for undergrad. So I studied bio in undergrad, and I was interested in climate change and sustainability back at that time as well. And I knew that that was an area that I wanted to move into. And after undergrad, I went and I got my MBA. And right after that, I started working at an engineering firm in the sustainability group. So this is back just over 10 years ago now. And so I was there for just over a year. And then I moved into my first ever tech startup. And that was kind of like an ignorance is bliss moment of my life, where I joined a startup with two other guys in their mid-50s who had been consultants for 30 years. None of us knew anything about software, but we knew that we wanted to democratize what we called sustainable return on investment analysis, or kind of business case analysis for the built environment, so we could basically make the case for greener infrastructure, greener buildings. So I was at that company for 4 years and learned a lot about how to build and how not to build product and software, which was pretty cool. And then transitioned into data science actually from there. So with a bio degree and an MBA, I'm like, I think a lot of people actually in product and software take very like non-linear paths to get to where they are for some reason. So that was me as well.
That tends to be the trend that we see on this show for sure as well.
Yeah. So coming out of that tech startup experience, I was like, I really wish I had a stronger technical foundation. So I moved into data science, and I worked as a data scientist for 3 years.
Wow.
I worked at an AI company in Toronto. And then in 2020, right after COVID hit, I actually was working on sales funnel optimization models with machine learning models. And I was like, I kind of miss working in climate. I miss working in sustainability. And so I started sort of reaching out to my network and figuring out what was going on in Toronto at the time. And this new company called Manifest Climate had just started. And I got connected to one of the co-founders, who's now my boss, and been here for the last 2 years. So then at Manifest, my role started off on the data side of things. I kind of actually like started in product a little bit, but there was a bigger need on the data side of things. So I moved into helping to create our methodology around how we conduct assessments, around how you're disclosing and managing climate at your business. Mm-hmm. So I worked on how we're creating that methodology and making sure that we're collecting data in the right way so we can build machine learning models out of that. And then I built our first NLP models and just moved into the role of head of product 6 months ago.
All right. Well, congratulations. It's quite a story. I love it. And I think later in the show, I'm really at going to be asking you about your passion for sustainability and what brought you back to that. But before we do, you touched on this a little bit, but let's talk a little bit more about Manifest Climate, what you do as a company, the problem that you're solving.
Yeah. So we are building one of the world's first climate risk planning solutions at Manifest Climate. So long story short, we help businesses make the climate transition. So a lot of the time when we talk to companies, they'll say, oh, well, we only have one office, or, we're located in such and such a spot, and like, we don't have to worry about heavy rainfall or tornadoes or hurricanes. But I think what a lot of companies don't think about is that the acute or chronic physical risks are only one dimension of what's happening with climate change. You also have to pay attention to what's called transition risks. So, when you think about policy or legal risks or regulatory changes, there's shifts in market demand, there's investor pressure, there's reputational risk. And I think different companies take these things into account, to different levels or different degrees. But that's what we help with, is we help with all of these things around, all right, what kind of physical risk should you be thinking about? What kind of initiatives should you be thinking about, both in terms of how you're managing it, but also how you're disclosing it internally as well as to your investors.
Wow, that's super interesting. And so this brings us into the topic that you chose today, of course, and that is data-driven approaches to climate management, and really how are climate tech and AI helping businesses with the climate transition. Now, I have to say, as you're explaining what you're doing as a company, one of the first things that kind of comes to my mind is the real life story and the movie made famous by Julia Roberts of Erin Brockovich, right? Of companies doing things wrong as far as the climate is concerned. And I visualize in my mind, this board, these people, a lot of manpower to maybe have traditionally either hide such things or make things compliant, right? So let's speak to the tech and the AI component. Like, how is this now transitioning? What does this look like on a computer versus boots on the ground?
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, with the Erin Brockovich reference, maybe one of the things they'll say is, one of the things that we talk about internally, and one of the kind of taglines that we use sometimes is, we don't focus so much on how business is affecting climate, as much as how climate change is affecting business. That's kind of how we're approaching it a little bit.
So the inevitable, like, it's sort of like, wake up, pay attention.
This is like it's coming, and all of this is going to happen, and it is happening. And like the SEC in the US is going to be almost definitely releasing new reporting standards next year, or even later this year, around climate reporting. And a lot of our prospects or other companies are starting to think about this and go like, oh crap, like, we have to pay attention to this now, and we're going to be forced to disclose on all kinds of topics related to how we're managing climate at our business. And the truth is, we're not managing climate in a lot of these different things, right? And so there's, a bunch of pieces to our software, but maybe I'll just talk about like the broad brushstrokes, which is, the first piece is, we need to be able to tell you where you're at, right? In order to know where you're going, you need to understand where you are. And so for that, we analyze public disclosures of our clients, and we use a methodology that is based on a series of either existing or emerging regulatory standards, including the SEC. And all of those are based on a framework called TCFD, which you don't really need to know much about, except that it is a standard that's being adopted across the world, and all of the regulatory standards are based on a flavor of the TCFD, and it's all around climate reporting and climate disclosure. So we have a methodology that's based on that, and the first step of what we do is we analyze your public disclosures, and we can then tell you where you're at. And we basically say to our clients, we're a proxy for what investors would see. And a major problem in the space is that there's no consistency right now, and this is what's changing with the regulatory standards, but really there's very limited consistency around how companies are talking about climate, even down to like something like emissions reporting, right? So in climate change, when you talk about carbon emissions metrics, it's normally broken down into what's called 3 scopes. Those are like 3 categories of emissions. So there's scope 1 emissions, which are direct emissions. So like if we had to, fire a gasoline engine to run the electricity here or something like that, or to run a factory, that's direct emissions. Scope 2 would be indirect emissions, right? So there's lights on in the room that I'm in right now, but there's a power plant that's hundreds of miles away that probably burns some sort of fuel source to produce this electricity. So that's a scope 2 example of scope 2. And then scope 3 would be like, I commuted here today, or you guys commuted to your work, or we produce a service that then has downstream emissions, or a product that has, so that's an example of scope 3 emissions. And the reason I bring this up is because even within scope 3 emissions, or the way that we talk about carbon, there's inconsistency around how it's calculated, what's incorporated there, what's not. And the same thing goes with disclosure across all the different elements of climate. So one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to create a structure to how we assess, how companies are assessed in terms of their disclosure and management quality, so that you can then be compared in an apples to apples way against everybody else. And then we provide you with data that you can use to say, here's where we're ahead. And here's actually, not to your Aaron Brockovich point, like here's actually, it's not all a bad news story. Here's where we're doing things that are good, right? Because we are doing some things that are good. A lot of companies are doing things that are good. And then here where our gaps are, and based on the data of where we're furthest behind, here are the things that we should actually focus on first, because let's be honest, we can't do everything all at once. And normally sustainability teams are pretty small. So with our software, we have natural language processing models that we use to process a lot of documents, thousands, tens of thousands of documents, so that we can then benchmark you against companies. We can conduct really detailed reviews, and then through our software, we provide all this data and assessments and help you to actually make the changes.
So Ryan, if I could just ask along those lines, so is it as simple, in my hearing you say it's not simple, it's very complicated, but it's almost like you need to set the benchmark to say what good looks like when it comes to climate and sustainability, or climate in general, how you managing climate. Is that right?
That's exactly right. In fact, we have a section of the software that's titled "What Good Looks Like" for each of the action items. Yeah.
And then the other question I have is, because I'm so much into AI, I love it, NLP, it can provide so much information. And is there a section that your software provides to have suggestions on how to do things better, like maybe a more energy efficient building? I'm curious.
Totally. So we kind of go in steps. So step 1 is we conduct the disclosure review. Step 2 is we provide you with a gap assessment. Step 3, which is kind of in line with this kind of step 2A, is we rank those so you understand what to do first. And then you can basically think of it as like, if anyone out there uses Agile or uses Jira, it's kind of like a Jira board where like you've got this set of action items that you can take for either managing or disclosing climate. And you can add those into like a sprint, if you will. It's basically like you can create a climate action plan. And then within each of those action items, again, using the Jira analogy, there's like a series of what we could call acceptance criteria. So we talk about, why does this matter? What does good look like? Why were you assessed the way that you were? How do you compare against others? But then we also kind of have a best practice and peer example repository in our database. So you can actually go and you can see exactly how others, companies similar to you have either managed or disclosed these things. And it's very precise. Like we take you straight into the highlighted context of other documents for your peers or best practice companies. And then, yes, we have tools and resources to help you to implement as well. Because another big problem is that a lot of people in the climate space or risk who are working on this, everyone's just kind of like off on their own, like reinventing the wheel, like figuring out how to do this, and everyone's making their own case for their own reasons. And it's so teams like that are very small. They have a lot on their plate. And so our job is basically to try and make things easier.
So with the TCFD, if you don't mind, kind of along those lines, you are making their life easier, because it sounds to me there's going to be a set of rules and regulations or compliance requirements that'll be set forth that people will be governed by. Is that possible, or is that where it's taking it?
Yeah, might even go as strong to say like inevitable, like it is coming.
Okay.
This already is implemented. It's already mandatory in the UK. So we're expanding there right now. It is, I believe, mandatory in Japan. New Zealand rolled this out. And these are all like pretty new. This is all in the last couple of years. So that's why like the SEC is now looking at this in a very serious way. The CSA in Canada has this rolled out. The ISSB, which is related to IFRS. So if any of you are at a company that uses IFRS accounting standard, that will start implementing this with the ISSB, which is very similar to how the SEC is doing. I'm only realizing now that I'm using way too many abbreviations, but it's coming everywhere is my point.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. And a tool like Manifest Climate, it sounds to me like it's sort of like before or even now, there's the well-intentioned blind leading the blind, and a lot of a slow process, a lot of bumping around. And so you come in, what have you seen in terms of maybe like the ROI, or like how has this helped speed up in real time for your users, your clients, in terms of them meeting compliance, getting to where, even knowing where they want to go, getting there faster? And then what does that look like in terms of, you know, the bottom line or any other type of positive outcomes?
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of speeding things up, like, so there's actually two thoughts. One is that we make things more efficient. And the second is that we create new capabilities that wouldn't have been there otherwise, or we create practically new capabilities. And what I mean by that is, you know, there's some companies that we've spoken to, some prospects and some clients actually that we have, where they basically have done internally before we started working with them a version of what we built. They, you know, came up with some idea of how to assess themselves, and then they had a bunch of people on their team go through their documents and read every sentence and then figure out, you know, how they're assessed, and then do the same thing for like 5 of their peers. And it takes months of effort to do that, right? Mm-hmm. It's a trend. It's a huge amount of time, a tremendous amount of time to be able to do that. So of course, obviously we save, like, that's like even if you're talking about the amount of time it takes to start an engagement with us and then get to that same point, it's like an order of magnitude in, you know, improved efficiency. But obviously, we're not just giving you, like, you know, information at a high level in 5 companies and where you're at. We go way deeper than that. And the idea is like, you know, a problem in the space, another problem is that a lot of these assessments are like point in time assessments. So companies have somebody come in and they get a stamp on like, okay, here's where you are right now compared to this one standard. And like, here's where you should improve. But the truth is the standards are all evolving. In some cases, like the ISSB and SEC, on a quarterly basis, they're evolving right now. So it's kind of like, you know, you're being assessed and you're being told where you are in a river, and then you're like continuing to flow down the river, and like you're like, okay, but that's where you were at that point in time. Yeah.
And not just the compliance, but like you yourself as a company. It's all a moving target.
Totally. The compliance is moving, and then what you're actually doing is moving. So everybody's on, if I can use this term, everybody's on this little climate journey. It sounds a little like very squishy, but anyways, everyone's on a climate journey, and it's kind of true. And so yeah, and a lot of the sustainability team or risk team members or whoever's accountable for these changes, they have to stay on top of like who's responsible for, you know, implementing these different things across the organization and coordinating. And so that's why we're kind of creating this workflow tool that makes it easy for people to coordinate.
I would think just right now in California, they have the gas-powered cars. Gas-powered cars need to be done
phasing
by
out,
2035. But you still have, though, even though they're going to have electric cars, right? It still applies because those electric cars have implications to the climate too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The electricity has to come from somewhere.
I have a question for Ryan. Ryan, you mentioned several times comparing companies, that by standardizing, I mean, I get the part about the AI tracking over a long period of time and being more efficient and, you know, more accurate, if nothing else. But why do you have to compare companies to company? I mean, I noticed Bank is one of your clients. but so is Heinz. So what are you comparing? Are they wearing underwear, or I mean, what?
Yeah. Well, good question. But so maybe what I'll say is we don't compare every company comparison doesn't matter. Like they don't all matter equally, right?
Right.
So one of the things that we're adding, or I guess that we already have been doing and we're continuing to do, is we allow our clients to select specific companies of interest that they want to be compared against. Yeah, so that's really where it comes in. Because of course, if you're talking about if you're a multi-billion-dollar financial institution in the United States, you probably don't care to be compared against, some small retailer in, some other jurisdiction. So of course, yeah, we're taking that into account.
So, but why is that valid?
Matters.
What's
the
benefit to a company to be compared to a peer?
Well, two things. Number one, nobody wants to be behind. Everybody, so that's the first thing. But the second thing is, people want to have examples of what good looks like, and we can give them descriptions of board overseeing climate related metrics 4 times a year on a quarterly basis, that's good. But when it comes to okay, but how are other people communicating this in a really clear way? How are they weaving that into the larger narrative about what their organization is doing? It's always easier when you're not taking something from 0 to 1, but you have an example in front of you. And so that's actually one of the more sought after elements in the software right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of the power numbers, right? I think I saw this once, a meme in Facebook or something. It had something to do with the world doesn't need 100, 0. What is it? When you're not producing anything, there's the 0. I just went blank here.
Power of 0.
Yeah. No. Zero emissions,
okay.
my carbon footprint or something, right? We don't need 100 people with a 0 carbon footprint. We need,
carbon neutral, is that
yeah, but 10 million, a billion people working toward that imperfectly, right? It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs the numbers imperfect.
Totally.
And that's where I see kind of where you're headed. I mean, the inevitable is happening. You're going to have to get there. But trying to get that number and that push behind you. So that said, who's maybe who are your users? Are you targeting that, the companies who are very much invested in this and interested in it right now? Or are you also trying to do that education piece and just build up that momentum? What's the best approach?
That's a really good question. Right off the bat, I'll say it's really hard to educate people and sell at the same time. It's very hard to do that. So generally, that's not what we're doing. I will say there's a lot of companies out there who are starting to kind of get it, who we would say, who understand this is important and they understand they have to make this change, and they just don't know how to do it. And so, at the end of the day, what we offer is we're really framing it more as a solution where we've got software, but we also have climate experts on our team who kind of help you to use it and then kind of go beyond even what the software can do, because there's complexity to this implementation. But it's interesting because I've been in the space for over 10 years now. And I've kind of seen, even in that, I guess, relatively short amount of time, I've kind of seen an evolution from individuals at companies. Even when we were trying to make the business case for sustainable design, we were helping people with dollars and cents. That's what we did at my first climate tech startup. People wanted to know the answer to one question, which is what's in it for me? Right? That's what people wanted to know the answer to. And what we'd come up against is that there would often be 1 or 2 sustainability champions who would love it. But then when it came to the decision makers who weren't necessarily climate champions or sustainability champions, who are thinking about supply chain efficiencies, or they're thinking about their cash flow, or they're thinking about whatever, this just wasn't as important. But what we're seeing now, and this was kind of accelerated by COVID as well, because people are realizing that these risks are actually not so far off, and actually we're more interconnected than we maybe gave credit for, and like all these different things. And the climate is starting to change. Like the narrative is changing from this is going to happen to holy crap, this is happening, right? So with all of that at play at the same time, and you're seeing buying patterns shift, there's still, it's not as mainstream, I think, as it should be, but I can tell you, we don't have to educate as much anymore, because there are a lot more companies out there where it's not just the sustainability team that's saying we need this, it's the risk team, and it's the senior executives, it's the CEO, it's the board. So that kind of helps.
Thank you. I think that's encouraging. It is encouraging, albeit still frightening. Actually, Matt, I think just the other day I saw you make a comment on LinkedIn, something about glorifying. It was a post on, you know, the generation before, like drinking out of water hoses and, you know, walking to school both ways in a snowstorm kind of mentality. And you said, yeah, but let's not glorify it. We as a generation have created a mess, and now we're responsible for cleaning it up, something of that sort.
Yeah, there was a post in LinkedIn glorifying the past. So this is like make American great again. It struck me that way. And my response was, I was one of those kids in the picture. Okay. So don't tell me about them. We've made a mess of things. We ignore all the signals coming at us and stuff like that. And this is at least one way of people who want to do good will have the signals, and will have it in a way that will make the regulatory agency happy. That's good. Let's hope that a lot more companies are not ignoring this, just passing through, and oh yeah, we're terrible. We're terrible. But once you have those numbers in front of you, I think it's harder. Like you said, people are learning. I mean, the water is up to here,
Right?
And you know where it's going, right? So,
and to be honest, it's not just about doing the right thing anymore. It's just good business, and that's a big part of what we talk about, and what we're seeing more and more in the market. By the way, I apologize. There's construction going on behind me. I don't know if you can hear that.
You're good. Well, great. So we're actually at the final few minutes of the show today, and I wanted to bring it back to your story. At the very beginning, you mentioned wanting to come back to sustainability. So share a bit about us, not necessarily the sustainability, but the idea of passion and choosing to work in something that is actually meaningful to you. What was that process like for you, and what might our viewers emulate and learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm probably that dissimilar from a lot of people, in the sense that I just want to feel passionate about what I'm doing. And for me, that passion was around climate change, and it always has been. And I kind of fell into technology, to be honest with you. I fell into data science and product management, and I love product. I love building great products, and I find it really exciting. You have to think very cross-functionally across a bunch of different areas and unite a bunch of different things together. So I love that, and that's part of the reason that I went into data science as well, so that I could kind of connect more dots. So I'm not sure. I mean, my goal was to move it to work in something that I was passionate about, and ideally be able to make a living at it. And so far it's working out okay. Like fingers
food would be nice.
Yeah, but you know, it all depends on what your motivation is, right? Like my primary motivation wasn't, you know, making bank. It was like making a difference and making it, you know, having a good career and making a difference. So that's, you gotta set your priorities, right?
Yeah.
And the final question then, to the company culture of Manifest. What was it about the company, their culture, and where you're at now that made you say this is it?
Honestly, sometimes you just get lucky, and you know, I did have a sense just through reviews, obviously, of what this was going to be. But like, as I'm sure you guys and all the listeners know, you never really know after interviews. You only really know when you get in. And Manifest has a lot of heart. And we have a lot of smart people that are trying to be smart about the way that we try to make a difference with climate. And it's about the mission, but it's also about making businesses better. And everybody at Manifest is totally just bought into that. And we care about the mission, but there's also just so much heart that comes straight from the top from our co-founders in terms of the way that we operate as a company. You know, we put a lot of emphasis on not having like a super structured, debatably to our detriment sometimes, not as structured a hierarchy, you know, not as much management as some places, because we want people to be more autonomous and be able to, you know, contribute in the way that they think is most effective. And so you combine that with the heart, we all care about each other. We're all trying to do something that we care about. I think every place has things to work on, but I think we're doing a lot of things right on that.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us today to share your story, your wisdom, and more about Manifest Climate and the way that what you're doing is useful to pretty much every business out there. So get on board, folks, with your climate transition. Also, of course, Matt and Colleen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And listen, one final announcement, the final show of the week, but we do have our recap show coming up on Monday morning to introduce next week's show. It's a full week, both Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday here at Dojo Live. But remember, next week is the transition to 10 o'clock Pacific. We will no longer be going live at noon, but 10 o'clock Pacific. So thank you and see you then, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.